Perched atop a hill, a lighthouse dominates the world's most prestigious vineyards. Who would have imagined that this land of Champagne, marked by barbarian invasions, torn by wars, and lashed by winter winds, would one day witness the birth of a sparkling wine, symbol of celebration and luxury. This wine region, France's northernmost, counts more than 70,000 acres of vineyards dedicated to Champagne wine. In the Marne Valley, along the slopes of the Reims mountain, on the Côte de Blanc or Reims, for centuries, man has cultivated grapes where nature has been more clement. Seen from above, this sea of vines appears peaceful, almost motionless. Yet below its visible surface, it still conceals many secrets. For 4 generations, the Legrand family has been cultivating grapes on the hills of the Vendières, a town about 12 miles from the city of Reims. A few months ago, Thibault Legrand took over the operation from his father Patrice, a winemaker who is passionate about the geological history of Champagne.
Look at this limestone full of marine fossils. There's an oyster conserved here. This rock is evidence of an ancient sea 45 million years ago, during the Lutetian age, and it was part of the Paris Basin. The shores of the Paris Basin extended all the way to Champagne, so the basin was gradually filled with sedimentations such as this limestone rich in fossils. So 45 million years ago there was the sea, the shores, and all that. And today we see a much different relief, because you have to imagine the valleys as they were created, the rivers digging into all the ancient sedimentation, and which will form the landscape that you can see now.
"20 years ago, in Fleury-la-Rivière, Patrice Legrand discovered an incredible deposit of seashells. Little by little, the winemaker abandoned his work in the vineyards to dig up the hill's bowels.
When you see all the layers that have accumulated, and all these different materials that have accumulated progressively over the periods, they really tell a story. It's thanks to these materials, thanks to the presence of these fossils, that we discovered what happened in our different regions. And in Champagne, it reads like an open book. It's fascinating.
With the help of his son, Patrice has drilled over 65 feet of galleries. Today he presents his findings, including the Giganteum bell tower, in a small paleontological museum built directly into the rock. But his greatest discovery is kept in one of the windows of his laboratory. A precious fossil dating back 60 million years, to an age when the vines still grew wild and didn't yet bear grapes.
Here's a fossil that I found before you were born.
Nice.
I found this in Cézanne, not far from here. These leaves were deposited in hard water, filled with limestone. The leaves were completely covered with limestone. They disintegrated but left their imprint. It's a bit like in petrifying fountains. Here we can see the midrib, the secondary veins. This is clearly the base of the blade. For a winemaker, it's fantastic to find this type of fossil. It's one of the oldest vine leaves that may have existed in the world, so it's incredible.
Patrice Legrand perpetuates this ancestral work, that of the quarrymen who shaped the Champagne cellars of Gallo-Roman and medieval times. Chalk, easy to sculpt, was used then to build houses and large monuments. The quarries, and later the digging of new cellars, resulted in the creation of an underground network of incredible magnitude. A whole universe hidden beneath the villages and cities. Built in the 14th century, in the middle of a plain, the Cathedral of Notre-Dame de Reims witnessed the coronations of most of the kings of France. This Gothic monument almost disappeared after heavy bombing during the First World War. In 1954, Champagne winemakers participated in its restoration by funding a large triptych dedicated to the king of wines.
On the left side, you see all the work in the vineyard. The central part shows the pressing of the grapes, everything that creates the marc and grape juice for preparing champagne. And on the right, we see operations that affect us a little more, the activities in the winemaking cellar. But what's lacking is a reference to the subsoils, the chalk pits, to everything that happens in the city's subterranean zone. And this is normal because we're in a triptych here that uses light, while the subterranean area is a secret world. In Christianity, the subterranean zone belongs to the devil, to the evil powers. And so it was very difficult to represent chalk pits and wine cellars in their entirety in this kind of window.
A former stonemason, Philippe Tortebat is now a specialist in subterranean geography. Over the last 10 years, he has been listing and mapping the largest quarries in Reims' city. There are almost 200 miles of underground networks under the city of Reims. Originally, these quarries were dug to extract large blocks of chalk that were later cut for construction. The major champagne houses always store a portion of their production here, a billion-bottle treasure trove in these dark chalk pits.
In the 19th century, there are two famous widows who had the brilliant idea to recover all these quarries to create production cellars for the wines of Champagne. Remember that at this time, the locals had little money. They solicited investors. They said, invest in a new world, the world of Champagne. Sales were low, so the people took many initiatives. Today we talk about sustainable development. Here they recycled quarries to create production cellars for Champagne.
Hello.
Hi, I need to find my location, situate myself.
We're in the center, here.
Okay. What fascinates me in the chalk quarries is that we have a dark environment. An environment that seems static, but in reality, it's a living environment. Now let's go see the turning operation. It's an ancient gesture for the production of champagne.
These galleries offer ideal conditions for refining sparkling wine.
How many bottles do you turn daily?
45,000 maximum.
For the daily ritual of ridding, the wine cellars turn the bottles on their bases.
We make quarter turns, half turns, to get the maximum amount of deposit towards the neck and tilt them little by little. Here's the deposit. We're at the end of turning, you see here?
Once they're collected near the cap, the impurities are removed just before the cork is put in place.
We have temperatures that stay around 12 to 14 degrees maximum. The humidity is constant. The moisture in the air is regulated naturally because there's always a little water in the chalk. Chalk is a natural reservoir, which is very important in the long term. And we have about 85% humidity. And near urban centers, we have no vibrations since we're around 20 meters underground. So we escape all vibrations from urban transport on the surface.
Along the Marne, some 25 miles from Reims, we find the historic hills of Champagne on the chalky foothills of the village of Chouilly. A multitude of parcels of vines that benefit from the mildness of the valley.
We're at 1.5 meters.
The wine grower Richard Fouquet calls upon the geological and mineral expertise of Geoffrey Urbain.
We're below.
This trained scientist fancies himself a taster of terroir.
Here.
Right here. We can see the roots and how far they penetrate.
Here it's pure rock. It's better to go a little below, where it's a little more chalky, a little richer. You can go down to 40 centimeters. Dig deep. See? This is more pasty. It's very good. Here we have small vine roots that draw their nutrients. That's where they will feed. This is where they take their minerals. This is especially where we see the tactile aspect of wine, the purity of wine. It comes from here. Here we can see the private exchange between the root and the rock, which gives the wine its typical characteristics and especially the land parcel.
They're like layers.
We see lots of little... I started in the world of wine. I wanted to understand, with my scientific background at first, why, when I smelled the odor, a typical element, why we could not explain it. No one ever worked on it. Today, the sensory side is not worked on much in wine. So with my curiosity, when I tasted at a winery and visited the vineyards, I always took a little dirt, some rock, and instead of putting them in my window, I worked on them. And I realized that there were analogies between what I tasted in the soil and the tactile aspect of the wine. So every time I try to understand, I taste the rocks. That's very important, as our ancestors did, especially the monks, to understand what is the typicality of this plot compared to another plot of land. Yes.
Having just made the hole, I tell myself I'm opening a story that's 70 million years old, the period when the chalk was formed in this territory. We're really digging up an entire story. And plunging into the chalk like I do in my wine cellar, I imagine what life was like at that time, in the tropics, the heat, and then the sea. So we definitely travel while we work, and finding all these sensations in the wine, I think it gives the wine a soul.
The soul, or rather the spirit of Champagne, could well be found around the Abbey of Auvillers. It's here that at the end of the 17th century, a monk named Dom Pierre Perignon gave up his noble study of letters to pursue the sparkling wine. Legend claims him to be the inventor of the famed champagne. But for Geoffrey Urbain, above all, Dom Perignon possessed a great knowledge of champagne cepages.
The genius of Dom Perignon is, of course, the assembly of wine. He was blind at the end of his life, so he knew just by tasting the grape, which had its particularity, the taste of the different villages supplying the grapes. So he assembled them in his press. He initiated the assembly of champagne. Legend has it that he invented champagne, but we know today nobody really invented champagne. The sparkling aspect of wine existed long before, during and after they sought to understand and to master it in particular. Dom Perignon was one of the first to master the bubbles that generated the champagne industry that we know today.
These blending methods, developed by Dom Perignon, are among the best-kept secrets of the famed champagne houses. All the great oenologists of Reims have long known how to turn a still wine into a sparkling wine.
Hi, Gerard.
Hi, Thierry, how are you?
Fine, and you?
Very good, thanks.
The mystery of bubbles is a fascinating subject, so much so that physicist Gérard Léger-Belair has made it his main subject of study.
Let's go fishing. Fishing for small animals.
Oenologist Thierry Gasco collects samples of one of the essential ingredients for bottle fermentation, yeast.
Here we have gas.
They've started working.
They're working and growing.
Yes, and how many per milliliter?
Currently, our population is approximately 90 million yeast per milliliter. Active, 90 million more per milliliter.
Amazing. More than the population of France in 1 milliliter. That's great.
Everything started with champagne when they realized bottles were exploding in the cellars, so they wondered what was happening. And in the end, they realized fermentation was happening in the bottle. The wine was tasted and they thought it's not bad. So they began trying to understand things, to understand nature. And the one who best explained things, who made us make huge changes in champagne, was Pasteur, who everyone knows. So through his experiments in the living medium, such as yeasts, he explains all the phenomena. And through that, we start to work in a more scientific way. And we'll then understand how to get a regular champagne. And today, to get a product we can repeat year after year.
Each house has its own secret formula. Once the blending of different grape varieties is completed, sugar and the precious yeast must be added.
Go anywhere in the world and say the word champagne and people think bubbles. The consumer's imagination is closely tied to the bubbles. I wanted to do a scientific study to thoroughly understand as much as possible all the processes behind the formation of the bubbles.
In his laboratory at the Science University of Reims, the physicist Gérard Liger-Belair studied the birth and the journey of a bubble of champagne and ended up obtaining never-before-seen images.
We'll use this camera to look at the small bubble trains that climb along the wall to physically see the origin of the formation of bubbles. What you see on the screen is small atmospheric dust called cellulose fibers. There are dozens on the surface of the glass, and these small fibers have the ability to literally take in the carbon dioxide dissolved in the vicinity and release it as a bubble. When you see the dust particles, you realize there's a dozen small bubble trains behind each one of them. For each bubble train, a tiny speck of dust, not in the original champagne, but on the surface of the glass because there are hundreds of dust particles of this type floating in the atmosphere. Some will cling to the glass surface, and they're able to generate bubbles in the flute at the tasting. This little cellulose fiber is sending out around a dozen bubbles every second. So if we don't drink the champagne and let all the bubbles escape, between 1 and 2 million will be formed in the flute.
It's been several years since the photographer Michel Joyot has been combing the vineyards to capture the soul of this land. This native of the Champagne region has embarked on an extensive photographic inventory of the classification of vineyards, cellars, and champagne houses for UNESCO's World Heritage.
This lighthouse is a symbol of the creativity, the touch of folly that some Champagne residents had in the past. Here it was Joseph Goulet who decided to create a lighthouse, place of festivity and art, because there were concerts here and various performances. It's the touch of folly that Eugène Mercier and Madame Pommeret had, and that made the reputation and the effervescence around the Champagne region.
After several books dedicated to the underground universe of Champagne, the photographer has still not finished with all the stories it contains. Back in Reims, he enters a cellar, guided by its owner, Vitaly Taittinger. Michel Joyot seeks to photograph the vestiges of the past, etched in chalk over the centuries. You see, this is John the Baptist, patron saint of cellar workers. Come,
He's looking down.
look how pretty this little crayère is, this small cellar.
The small format.
Because we always need someone to watch over our profession. You find a little portrait here.
A bunch of grapes, a clover, a heart. There are many hearts here.
There are many hearts.
There are many lovers.
It's always been the thing most important in life, after champagne. Most of these galleries were used as shelters during wars. The population came to take refuge during the bombings. Some families even lived here. During the First World War, the Reims City Council moved into these chalk pits.
You're going to show me the writing of the Italian soldier because I do not remember at all where it is.
This young woman is looking for the registration of an Italian aviator. The pilot took refuge in the cellar during the War of 1914, just after his aircraft was damaged. Look, I am from the Italian army. I've come here to save the honor of France. Signed, Adriano. And after?
1918.
But what is beautiful to see is that the region that today creates the wine of celebration and happiness finally gave shelter to a lot of wars and also housed soldiers of all nationalities. Meanwhile, in Fleury-la-Rivière, Thibault Legrand is looking for a nice rock sample for an unusual experiment.
Here we have a very nice fragment. Yeah, it's very nice. Look here.
His friend Geoffrey Urbain intends to show him how 45 million years later, the sea still has an influence on the house's champagne.
Bonjour Patrice.
Hello, Patrice. Hello, how are you? Take a look at what Thibault took from the cellars. It looks very representative of what we find in the cellars here. I'll just take a small piece of this rock and I'll wet it so we obtain the base for the tasting. That should be enough. Let's grate off some of the shells. I think we have a good sample now. That sure smells like the beach. Now we'll prepare the other glass. That should be enough. And now we'll discover the iodine imprint. I'm there on the beach. You try, Patrice. You must air it well. You get all the odors, the marine iodine, and the sea smell. The little vine roots will extract these nutriments from the soil, the water, salt, and minerals. Depending on the mineral composition in the rocks, this gives the wine its typicality. Oligo-elements in the rock, in the ground, enter the vines through the groundwater. Thanks to photosynthesis, we'll find all the elements in all the vine's organs, such as the grapes. It's then up to the winemaker to preserve this mineral imprint, and the typicality of the champagne we'll try during the tasting. Here's the house champagne. Thank you, Thibault. We have the very fruity quality, but the proportions. We get this iodine character, which marks the imprint. Passing from one glass to the other is quite impressive. I'll let you have the experience. Ventilate the glass well, so it comes out well. You're breathing iodine dating from 45 million years ago. It's an experience that's quite exceptional and extraordinary. I'm greatly moved by it. It smells like vacation at the seaside. Right. I'll place mine in the case first, and then you can put yours in.
Thibault Legrand has inherited his father's passion for this underground universe. The young wine grower seeks to honor the valuable relationship between the vine and its cellar. He must now write the history of its vineyards, in mingling the visible with the invisible.